One might think that the change of seasons doesn't come around for another 5 weeks yet, with the first day of summer on June 21st. But an even more important seasonal change in this part of the world is already upon us. May 1st was the kickoff for a season that Californians know all too much about. This is officially fire season. Truth be told, according to CAL FIRE, with the prolonged drought so much of California has experienced for the past 5 years, and with over 700 wildfires already having been reported in the state since January 1st, there really is no distinct fire season anymore. It is simply a year-round experience which all of us have to endure. I have had several occasions in my life, sometimes for a few hours at a time, sometimes for a few days at a time, to find myself in the midst of a forest fire. Back in the late 1980s and early 90s, while I was serving as a priest in the northwest corner of Montana, I did what most everybody in that part of the world did to get by. That is to say, I diversified. You see, nobody there does just one thing for a living. Everybody cobbles together different sorts of jobs. Some of which probably pay, some of which most likely don't, just to make ends meet and to keep life interesting. Come to think of it, I guess it's still what I do today, isn't it? Well, one of the things I did back in those days, in addition to being a priest, serving along with Sylvia, 2 very small congregations, was that I was an EMT. I was an ambulance driver. And being that the town we lived in was smack dab in the middle of the Kootenai National Forest, we usually had more than our fair share of forest fires. The Forest Service would contract with the small volunteer ambulance service of which I was a member to provide medical care in the fire camps for the crews who were working on the fire lines. Now, if you've ever been to one before, you will know that fire camps are a totally self-contained community with a command center, food services, entertainment, a little bit of shopping, and an incredibly well-stocked medical unit. All amidst a sea of tents and tarps and bedrolls. Working a fire was a way to pick up a little extra income. And besides, it's always a way to hang out with some incredibly fascinating people. Firefighters, as some of you perhaps know, really are a breed unto themselves. Well, for the folks here this morning who have lived in Laguna Beach for more than 20 years now, you will remember the Great Fire of '93. Better than most people in California, you understand the awesome power and destructiveness and the sheer terror which can accompany a wildfire. When the winds howl and the fires burst forth from every direction. If you have ever met a large-scale fire up close and personal, you will know that it is both a terrifying and a mesmerizing experience. To witness nature's power in all her fury is both humbling and exhilarating. The sights, the smells, sometimes even the sounds of trees exploding from the heat a mile or more away. All of those sensory experiences will stay with me probably for the rest of my life. A few years ago now, Sylvia gave me a book entitled The Smoke Jumper by the author Nicholas Evans. Nicholas Evans is a British writer whose most well-known title is The Horse Whisperer. In The Smoke Jumper, however, Evans offers the most vivid description of the inception of a forest fire that I have ever read. And so allow me for just a couple of minutes this morning to share with you a bit of The Smoke Jumper. Up the mountain and over the ridge, little more than a mile from where the group was camped, the lightning of the previous night had nestled all this time in the old lodgepole's desiccated heart. A cocoon of dull heat that neither glowed nor any longer smoked. And had the wind not risen that night and funneled upward through the pine's ribbon stem, along crevices carved in it by ants and mites, then this pupa of fire might well have died. Fanned by the breeze, however, it fed on fragments of resinous wood until it glowed and grew and glowed yet brighter. And at last, in the witching of the night, it hatched. The grass and scrub around and beneath the old tree were dry and brittle and rustled in the wind. And when the stem torched, its entire length was engulfed within seconds, and flaming fragments fell upon the grass, which torched as well. And as the lodgepole's limbs came asunder, they fell and rolled downhill, laying trails of flame in their wake, which spread and joined and spread yet further, until the entire slope was ablaze. Had none of the rolling limbs of flame reached the forest, the fire might have starved and died. But the largest found a steeper route and crashed and cartwheeled deep among the trees, sending showers of sparks as it went. And so parched was the forest that every spark found an eager host, and every host became a fire of its own until all conjoined and roared as if in remonstration that want of water should have forced them to drink this other fatal element instead. The smoke jumper. There's an old church camp song that tells us it only takes a spark to get a fire going. Today we celebrate the feast day of Pentecost, the Christian holiday which finds its roots in the Jewish holiday of the same name. For the Jews, Pentecost fell 50 days after Passover. That's what the word Pentecost means, 50th. It was, and it still is to this day, the time when Jews offer the first fruits of the new harvest and commemorate that event when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. If you will remember, on a mountain which was covered with wind and fire. As Christians, we are reminded of that story in the 2nd chapter of the book of Acts, our first reading this morning, as Jesus' disciples gathered 50 days after Passover, 50 days after Jesus' death and resurrection, during that same Passover season, gathering with other faithful Jews for the Jewish festival of Pentecost. And as they gathered that day, there was a wind, a mighty wind. And there were tongues as of fire. And that fire rested on the disciples, and they were anointed with that fire, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit. Those winds of change, those fires of passion, blew through and among that faithful group of men and women, forming them and informing them and transforming them from a loose-knit group of believers into a unified, focused, and mission-driven community. And those disciples, who once were nothing but a band of followers of some itinerant preacher, now were made new, now were made whole, now were given a new mission in life. And the church was born. Whatever those folks thought that they were beforehand, God had now recreated them into a new body. Whatever work they had once believed might be their divine purpose, they now understood their relationship with God, their relationship with one another, the work that God had set before them in a whole new way. It only takes a spark to get a fire going. Pentecost. It's about believing that that holy spark which lighted upon the disciples is still present, that it resides within you, that it resides within me, that it resides within each of us and all of us, that it resides within this holy place we call St. Mary's, that it resides everywhere in God's creation. And Pentecost is about believing that a single holy spark, when fanned by a single breath of holy wind, can ignite and flame and burn ever so brightly. There are people around us. You know these people who have yet to experience that glorious flame. And there are people around us who perhaps had that flame burning once in their lives, but now the flame is dimmed, and it's hard to find the way. And there are people around us whose flames are present, but have yet to be fanned, and so remain little more than a spark. And there are people around us who have some kind of flame burning within them, but they don't have the words to describe that experience, and they don't have the community to nurture and develop that experience. And they feel utterly alone. There are people. We know them. We play with them. We live with them. We go to the shopping center or the golf course or the dry cleaner or the theater or the grocery store with them. We see them walking along the sidewalk here right in front of the church every day. Whether they're heading 3 blocks up the hill to the high school or 3 blocks down the hill to the beach. We know those people. When the day of Pentecost had come, suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and and divided tongues as of fire appeared among them. And a tongue rested on each of them. Pentecost. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not even about us. It's about the wind. And it's about the fire. Those same winds of change, those same fires of new life which blew through the disciples gathering on that day of Pentecost so long ago, even now are rattling our doors and shaking our windows and threatening to break into our lives, break into our church, break into our world today. It is the same holy wind. It is the same holy fire which blows out the cobwebs of the past and brings with it the promise of new life. Pentecost. It's about all the world, all of God's creation. It's about bringing that holy light of God, that holy flame of God, that holy fire of God, that holy wind of God out into the world and then setting it free. And then allowing God to do God's thing and as I like to say, sharing with God in the transformation of all creation. So, as you leave this place this morning, I urge you to bring your own Pentecost wind and your own Pentecost fire, and then turn it loose, that God's kingdom might come, that God's will might be done on earth as it is in heaven.